Hey guys, today I'm gonna start this second unit of Nodevember, and because it's drawing, I thought that'd be a good opportunity uh, to make up for not doing Inktober. So here's an ink shader with an Eevee, so it's gonna be a little different from the other ones, where we're not gonna be changing the geometry like we would in cycles, so no displacement. But this is a really useful shading concept that you can use to make any kind of cartoon style. If you follow along with the concepts in this. Because the main node that makes this possible is the shader to RGB, which lets us draw on top of the lights. So I'm going to show you how to put that up, so I'm going to start from scratch. Just going to copy these over and shift them back. And let's make a new material and destroy this one. So just delete that, and then we're going to start with this diffuse shader. So right now this is regular shading, and I have these lights set up right here. I've got a lot of lights, so maybe we can start over with those and sort of play with it. You can do Shift D and then select type, so that selects all the lights. So it's deleted. As you can see, it's totally black, so that's just to show you need to add lights. Do that, Shift A. So let's add the Screencast keys add-on so you can see what I'm doing. So sorry about that. Let's just do that, and then I'm gonna change some of the settings in here. So increase the size, and if I make sure this is checked, so I want to be this all to be big as possible so you can see it. Good. So if I press Shift A, that brings up this add menu, same thing as up here, and you can add a light. I find it's just, if you learn the hotkeys, that's a good way of just keeping track of the things that people end up using often in this program. So here's the lighting. It's pretty dramatic. I've mentioned I sculpted this previously and never put it to much good use, so it's nice to use in this tutorial. Sometimes it's good to just study anatomy to understand the things and just develop as an artist. So that's why I made that, and then I didn't do much with it. So maybe the next step is do something with your art, something I need to get better at. So in Converter, go to Shader RGB. And the cool thing about this is if I, let's say I have a color ramp, and now I can totally modify these colors, the values here. Actually, let's use less than or greater than node. We'll do a similar thing, so it's wiping through the values, and it's just chopping off. Okay, they're either below 0.02 or above it, and that's how it decides those values. But we want to create this texture that I have here, so whenever I start a project, I like to use some reference. I'm using this program called PureRef, which if you've seen any of my tutorials, I always use because it's a great way to organize reference, because you can just drag and drop from the internet and put it right in. And so here I like the variation line thickness. Here I'm looking at kind of cross-hatching, which is kind of a different concept than this. I guess you'd say this is just hatching. I'm gonna go more for this feel, but I'm gonna show you how we can modify that to create other ink effects. And if I can show you how to layer it and use this, then you'll be able to create any style. You can make comic book style. It's all built on top of this shader to RGB, which, by the way, only works in Eevee, doesn't work in cycles because it relies on what's baked to the screen, if that makes sense. So cycles is bouncing light, so it's all physics simulations. So you would have to render out the image and then do those modifications if you were to do the same effect in cycles. There's not really a live way to do it. And if you want a cartoon feel, you might as well use Eevee anyway, because it'll be faster. So to get started, we're just going to use this wave texture, and with Control Shift I can just preview any of these nodes, see what they look like. So wave texture looks like this, and when I add it into here, we're going to get a combination of this topology. And if I do linear light, it's a similar effect to add, except it's mixing the two. So it's the values are more in between. So this is adding and subtracting. So like before it was shifting up, and now it's shifting in different directions. And yeah, and that's pretty nice, and it's uniform, so we'll work on that. And but once I add this, then we can combine that with the gradient nodes. You can see you get a nice fade right here with the gradient, and that's what all this is going to be built on. So let's give this some coordinates. I'm actually going to make it based on the camera, so our view, it changes depending on it, and but the scale is dependent on our distance from it, so that still changes, and that's in a way that is different from window. Window is dependent on the width in the window, so camera is going to be more consistent. So that's the effect I'm going to use for this. And do I have a camera in the scene? Let's see. Nope. So I'm going to go to Shift A and then Add Camera, and again, these are all the same menus as up here. So that's the Add menu right there. And so if I bring that right there, then I'm going to link these materials. So Control L and link object data would make the same data. So of the whole object, but we just want materials right there. And so let's adjust that, because each of these mapping things, the scale is going to look a bit different. And yeah, so here we have that. So this is going to be the point that we render at, and just working from this will be helpful for when you set a camera, you can just focus on making it look good in that position. And if you're going to render something out, it's good to keep in mind exactly how you're going to end up using it, because that can save you time. So I want hatching, I want variation. So I'm going to use this Voronoi texture, which looks like this, and then use this color. It's all random, and in order to use that, to distort this, I want this to be in random rotation. And instead of adding this add node, which I quickly did without thinking, by pressing Shift A and then the underline, so I want to add a vector mapping node, so V for vector, M for mapping, so I just do like Shift A, VM, and that brings me that. And then if I use a combine, so in the inversion menu, combine, and plug that into rotation, and then color, we then get all this. Yeah, and so this is random. It's not totally random because I think this is between 0 and 1, so we can multiply that. So by pi, because this is in a unit called radians, which is an alternative to degrees for measuring angles, and that's what Blender uses. And now if I use another multiply node, we can between 0 and 1, so 0 is going to be no rotation, and then 1 is going to be all the rotation. So we use this multiply node to remap that. And then so we have that, but I think I'd like it to taper off on the edges, just to make it smoother, so that they blend into each other. You don't have that straight line. So we can alleviate that. It's not a perfect solution, but solution that I got is adding that, and then using this distance, which looks like it's a point proximity from each of these cells in the Voronoi pattern. So if I bring that over, just to bring it closer, so I can just plug these in, and we're just gonna add. Let's see if that gives us the effect we want. Yeah, so it's lightening up the edges. If we bring that all the way, we'll maximize that. We can use a color ramp just to fall off of that. Each of these is going to be a dot, and that's kind of an issue because the shape of these isn't all dots. But I think the subtleness gives a pretty good effect. Like if you just keep it subtle, you can have a good variation. And let's also make that camera actually. So right now the default is generated, which just maps it based on the bounding box, so that the overall size of the object. So now again, that's scaled based on our point of view. So I'm gonna make that smaller. Well, no. Well, I'm gonna make the scale number smaller, which makes everything bigger. And yeah, so let's look at that, what that is. I don't expect it to be perfect just yet. Yeah, there's a nice variation in the direction. Have that, you know, we still have like the straight, these straight edges. There's more we can do that with that to make it more subtle. The straight line is still going to be there. I mean, one thing you could do is just use any texture you find online with cross-hatching and just use that for your overlay. But yeah, so I think I'd like to adjust the density in the wave texture. So the wave texture is hiding down here, so I'll highlight that, bring it up. Let's just get, you know, organize this a little better. And yeah, so if we scale this in, we can even add distortion, give it a little bit of waviness. If we're going for more of like a Halloween-y, old drawing, maybe horror style comic sometimes uses this type of wavy line in the harsh light. It's kind of that feel that I'm sort of going for. And I think I just want that the fade of the Voronoi to be pretty subtle, actually. And then if I turn that up, we're going to get more of those lines to work with. I think that'll be good when we add. So there. And I'm doing a subtle shift by, I'm adjusting this subtly by holding down shift, and it's a lot stronger if I do otherwise. So there's that. And then, yeah, I'm not actually liking this mixture right here, that circles, so we can lighten the darkest points and maybe change it to ease, or how about B-spline? See how that looks. Because it's all a combination of just tuning these so that it works. If you've ever used an image editing program, like all these mixes exist in Krita, GIMP, or Photoshop, it's just different ways of combining color values. So that's 0. And let's just try and not, let's try it without. So let's look at this value right here. So there's not much of a difference because this part, B-spline is too subtle. Yeah, let's actually make this 2D so that the circles are consistent all around. Because 3D, there's variation in the height, so the center circles are vary in their value. So that's an important distinction. And plug it in there, we'll get this, so it gets more and more subtle. So we just turn this. And we can add a Strippling Effect if you wanted with another Voronoi. So let's just isolate that, bring it up a bunch, use this right here, shift right click to drag that out, and then maybe increase the size a little. And if we plug this into here. Again with adding, can then you can see how this adds like sort of those dots in places. So yeah, so that's reminding me of some like classic inking drawings or whatever. Yeah, we have those spots. It's the best choice. We'll just turn that all the way down. Let's forget about that. But you can play with that and see if there's a better way to do that. One thing we can do to maybe smooth out these edges or just kind of hide them a little bit is to add another mix shader here and add distortion to the Voronoi. So I'm going to use linear light. Like I said that before, it shifts it in different directions, and when we add something, so but this is the position, so this purple is the position because it's plugged into the vector, so it determines the position of this texture. And if we plug that in, because the noise looks like this. If I plug this in here, we get to start to distort this, and we can see that better with the color, how it affects the borders right there. So then it's less predictable, you know. And we turn down the detail. So we want it to be pretty simple. Don't want like a lot of wavy lines of where things start and end. But yeah, and so that masks things out quite well. When you're drawing stuff and you want to show depth of your model, here's a short lighting tutorial on that. Like the form, you want them to appreciate everything that you've sculpted, right? So I think he's missing his teeth right here. Let me just fix that real quick. So I'm going to select that with L. Symmetry. Oops, this has turned into a modeling tutorial. Symmetrize, and then I'm going to flip the axis so it's on the other side. So positive to negative, so this is the positive side, this is the negative side. Yeah, so if we go back, we can see it's, yeah, so now let's go back to talking about lighting. So you want, I think with the face, you want the front to be lit, but also to show off the edge of it. You don't want people to feel like you're hiding stuff, and it also adds some cool depth to have some rim lighting there. So like right there, like if we, that's why I created this sphere in the first place, so we can take a look at the directional lighting. So this is called like the rim lighting. And the darkest point here is important. I don't remember what that is on the top of my head, but there's when you're shading, you know, you spend most of the time probably blocking out like the overall shade, and then there's a light spot here, but then like these sharp places like the back and the dark areas of here, I guess occlusion you could call it, yeah, you know, but in certain lightings, if you're going for like a realistic scene and where the audience knows the scene well, having realistic lighting in different places could be important. One thing to note here is we don't have any color coming through in this material, which is okay for this style that I'm going for. If you want, to add color, you can, the best way to add color, I think, is using the multiply node with mix, and so like this color, you can make whatever you want. Let's use the actual colors of the lighting. So I'm again going to use this shader to RGB. If I plug that in there, you're going to get overlaid the ink with the actual the realistic shading from this diffuse texture right here, and so if we want, we could, to keep it comic booky, we could, even though like this is kind of a cool effect, kind of reminds me of like SimCity or something, that kind of filter. But so to simplify, use separate HSV, which means hue, saturation, value. And hue is like the color, saturation is how much color, and value is how bright something is. So I'm gonna, to get in there and adjust each individual one, I just separate it and then combine, and then I adjust these values just like I did with the separate XYZ right here. Or I used to combine in this case, but if you'll see I use separate XYZ a lot more often in my tutorials. So I talk about that in other videos, and yeah, check it out. But yeah, so currently we have no color, so let's add some red. And right now everything's showing as it should, and yeah, looks pretty cool to me. It's kind of like ink on paint, which reminds me of some comics. You know, when the printer quality got a lot better, you know, like 2000s comics or something. Comics from 2000 or 2010s or whatever. And yeah, but if we want to make them more comic booky, let's take out more variation. And a quick way to do that I have found is to add a map range. And I think I want to keep the hue as true to what it is, but the value and the saturation, I'm going to want to take values out. So if I use stepped linear and then I set the number of steps, if we can look at that, so you can see it's cutting it into separate steps, and yeah, and so it's subtle right here, but if we do that, the same thing to the saturation, you get more. But there's a lot of steps that it's using right now, so let's turn that down so there's less to work with. So yeah, 3 seems to work. Let's actually use a value node so we can adjust these at the same time. So I'm just going to plug this into the steps, and then down here, just 3. So these will always line up the gradients here we made here. And yeah, so if you is this working? If we sample this, it's coming out black. So maybe, I think for comic books, usually colors stay the same value, so let's just make that 0.5, yeah. Not too bright. I mean, we could make it super bright, and that could be a good stylistic choice, perhaps, but anyway, so and it's bright, but that's okay, because when we multiply it with the ink, we're getting that comic booky kind of feel. And yeah, and I know the prompt was drawing and not painting or comic books, but you can make this, you could use this to approximate any kind of drawings you want to do, which is really powerful and exciting. And like if you like doing stylistic models, I think this is a must know. So you know, let me think, are there any other tips that can include in this that would make this better? One thing that comes to mind is, a lot of times in comic books you have a thick outline, and there isn't a way to do that immediately in the viewport in Eevee, but there is a little trick you can do to get something pretty close to that. It won't have an even thickness, it'll be based on the geometry, but if we use input and then Fresnel, so I assume that's, yeah, IF, couldn't even find on the menu, but I just figure it takes the letter that's the first in the name that isn't taken. It's based on index of refraction, so if we look at this, it's just based on the direction that you're facing. So if you look at the sphere, it doesn't really change, because it's how much things are facing away from you, which is important in graphics, because, like, for example, use that to say how transparent or reflective something is. So like in a river, if you look straight down in the water, you can see through it, but when you look further away, the further away you get from something, the shinier it gets. You might notice that if you're driving on a road and far away, it looks reflective. People call that a mirage, and also that effect is the result of Fresnel, because as you get further away and the roads, because space curves from your perception, it turns away from you as you get further. Things get closer and closer, and so it becomes more reflective. So that's for null from the background. And again, we can use this greater than node just like we did with the ink right here. So that's really useful. And so we're getting the white outline, so we could use the less than node, which puts in the other direction right here. And so we're getting that outline. And we can again use this multiply. So multiply, perfect for adding color and also for making things darker. And yeah, so if I plug this in here, struggling a little. Yeah, so you can see that could add even more style to what you're making. So I think it's a little dark, so yeah, let's go back to and backtrack on this and just increase the value to 1, and you can see how that's affecting the model, having these different lights. So and if we, and keep in mind this is based on the lighting of the object, so if we increase the color in here, it smooths it out. It doesn't quite work as well. Workaround for that perhaps is to render it separately, use film and then transparent. So when you render an image, and as long as your color is set to RGBA with alpha being the transparent channel, you can overlay it in images. Yeah. So thanks for watching. I think a lot of you will get something really great out of this, so I'm really glad to share it with you guys. And yeah, just keep in touch. So